I was back at work on Monday after the conference, and my cell phone rang about 10:30, quarter to 11 in the morning, and the voice on the other end of the line said, "Is this Brian?" And I said, "Yes." "Who's this?" Because I didn't recognize the number. It says, "I want to tell you that what you've been talking about, you need to stop talking about." And I said, "What stuff was that?" And he says, "We know that you were with Linda Howe on last Thursday night, and we know that you went to dinner at a Mexican restaurant in Joshua Tree, and we were aware of what you were talking about with her and other people, and that your experience that you had when you were on the ice, when you were in the service. We don't want you talking about that. Specifically, we don't want you talking about the scientist that you picked up after being missing for a couple of weeks." And I said, "How would you know about that? I've only talked to certain people." And the voice in the phone said, "Well, we know pretty much everything." And then they said, "Just don't be putting that out there anymore. Certain people would prefer that you not talk about that." And I said, "Well, I'll consider that." And then the phone went dead. There was a click. Whoever on the other end hung up. I was like, wow, this is out of the blue.
What did you do next?
Well, I was kind of curious, so I took the number off my cell phone and Googled it on the Internet. It came back as the general phone number for the NSA.
The National Security Agency in Fort Meade, Maryland.
Yes. I called Kelly, my nephew, and he Googled it too.
Why would you get a threat specifically using my name now in June of 2016?
The only thing that I come up with is that report that's been going on the Internet of that British documentary team that was down there in Antarctica,
right? Something
that was found under the ice. That team went missing, and they have not found those people since. Possibly that documentary team was in the same area where those scientists went missing for those 2 weeks, and that somebody doesn't want putting two and two together and going, well, you know, there's people down there that went missing for 2 weeks back in the 90s, and now these people are missing and haven't been found yet. Maybe there's a correlation there.
The British documentary footage that Brian is referring to was first reported in a March 18, 2002 press release from the Atlantis Mapping Project in Washington, D.C. that began, quote, "The U.S. government said it will seek to block the airing of a video found by Navy rescuers in Antarctica that purportedly reveals that a massive archaeological dig is underway 2 miles beneath the ice," close quote. The video was allegedly the property of a Beverly Hills company called Atlantis TV that produced the Atlantis Mapping Project channel for the BBC in London until 2015 when it was closed down. The March 2002 release also said that the Atlantis TV crew had disappeared and that 2 U.S. Navy officers had found the missing production crew's videotape, quote, "in an abandoned supply dump 100 miles west of Vostok Station," close quote. That would be near the South Pole. The AMP press release said the video shown to National Science Foundation researchers at the South Pole's Amundsen Scott Station showed a pyramid and, quote, "other spectacular ruins and things they could not go into," close quote. Allegedly, Navy SEALs came in 1 or more helicopters to take objects away. Officials of the U.S. Naval Support Task Force in Antarctica denied the story and said the Navy did not possess any video shot by the missing Atlantis TV crew. But at the same time, there was another U.S. legal action in 2002 to block the release of a hardcover book entitled Raising Atlantis by Tom Greenius, a novel based on fact. The book is about a secret U.S. military expedition that discovers ancient ruins 2 miles beneath the ice in Antarctica. The government allowed the first e-book version in the spring to be released with sensitive information about U.S. underground continuity of government installations, but blocked the hardcover release until the sensitive information was deleted. Could that big ice hole that Brian and his C-130 Navy crew saw near the South Pole in 1995 and the later incident in early 1996 of the missing National Science Foundation scientists be linked to the 2002 Atlantis Mapping Project news release about the missing documentary crew and videotape of pyramids and other structures beneath the ice? if the U.S. government is trying to cover up the discovery of pyramid and other structures 2 miles below the ice near the South Pole in Antarctica, the secret would be revolutionary, because the last time the entire Antarctica continent was free of ice is generally considered to be about 15 million years ago. So any advanced architecture on land beneath the ice would be that old as well. Brian, would you have ever suspected that we were being spied upon and listened to in both the restaurant and where we talked on the grass near the parking lot?
I would never have thought that. But now, my 20 years in the military, there are things that I saw that I really can't talk about that tells me and has shown to me that our government is capable of anything. Okay, so finding this out that they knew that you and I and other people were where we were that night, it does not surprise me. With the work that you do and as accurate as the information you find and as hard as you work to verify the truth of what you report on, I can imagine that you are watched quite a bit, you know?
We're supposed to be American citizens protected by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We are not doing anything that is wrong.
No, I don't think we are either.
And you were never asked in your service for the United States Navy to sign a non-disclosure agreement about any of those efforts in Antarctica, correct?
Yeah. At the time when I was in the service and those incidents happened, we were verbally told we couldn't say anything, to forget about it, but I never signed the non-disclosure of anything that I did while I was serving in the Navy.
In Antarctica?
In Antarctica, yes.
Now let's play an excerpt from our original January 30th, 2015 interview.
Here's this huge hole in the ice, almost like a cave entrance, but it was large enough that you could fly a C-130 into it, a hole that went down. We were told not to fly that area, but we continued our mission and picked up our medical emergency and turned around and had to come back to South Pole for refuel. And when we got close to that air sampling again, we were told deviate this way so many miles and then turn back on course. Made our way back to McMurdo, and the entire crew was told to report to the skipper's office. We all got sat in this room, and this guy came in that nobody had seen before and said, okay, you guys saw this thing? You didn't see it.
And he means the big, deep hole.
Yes, big hole in the ice that was supposedly the air sampling station. We were told to not talk about it ever, and that area was considered off limits for research.
In your email to me, you wrote, talk among the flight crews was that there is a UFO base at the South Pole, and some of the crew heard talk from some of the scientists working at the pole of EBAs, an acronym for extraterrestrial biological entities, working with the scientists at their air sampling camp, which is the large hole in the ice. Yeah. We're told not to talk among ourselves officially, but the guys, after a flight, you know, you have a few beers, and it's like, yeah, I heard these scientists talking about that there's some guys there at Pole that were working with these strange-looking men. They weren't saying, you know, alien or extraterrestrial, whatever, and that the air sampling station was actually a joint base with the scientists and the ETs. In your email to me, you said, quote, none of the scientists would talk to any of the crew on the plane, and they looked scared. That was a mission. It was probably a 2.5-hour flight from McMurdo, in the middle of nowhere. We put this crew out there McMurdo had lost communication with. You're supposed to check in every so often by radio to tell McMurdo that everything's okay. So after they hadn't been heard of, we got sent back out there. Nobody around. All the equipment was still there, but the entire camp was gone. We called McMurdo on their radio to make sure that the radio was working, and we could hear McMurdo fine. A week later, supposedly these scientists had gotten back to camp and wanted to be picked up. And we went back in there. After we got airborne, I went back looking around, and these people's faces, they looked scared is what they looked. And
I asked my loadmaster, where have these guys been? And he said, I don't know, I can't get any words out of them. Blank stares, and he offered them food and stuff, and like nobody would take anything. And so they get back to McMurdo and unload their gear. It was put in isolation. Kind of weird. Why is that stuff being isolated? With everybody talking in the camp, all the civilians. Yeah, those guys went back to Christchurch, and they had a special flight for these guys. And nobody said anything.
Am I understanding correctly that each of the science groups that you guys flew in and out of the Antarctic base, they knew they were going to work with extraterrestrial biological entities down in that big hole?
What somebody had overheard was that there was an installation joint venture at Pole, not necessarily at the South Pole Station, but in the vicinity of South Pole. They were conducting some kind of project.
Between extraterrestrials and the human scientists.
Correct. It's like, man, what did these guys see? Why were they gone for 2 weeks that nobody knew where they were? It makes you wonder, is like, okay, so what is our government and other governments doing that we don't know about that's going on down there with visitors from somewhere else? And what possibly is still going on down there?
Brian, what can anyone do to an agency that calls up from anonymous voices who do not even identify themselves by name or agency they are calling from, and then try deliberately to intimidate?
I don't know what we can do. If the government says it's not going to happen or shut up, that's what happens. I think people just have to come forward and tell what they know. It's like one person stands up in a crowd and says, no, I'm not going to do it. And you know what? Somewhere in that crowd, there are other people that feel the exact same way. And if one more person stands up and one more person stands up, pretty soon you've got a crowd, and we need to get back into that kind of mindset and make the government serve us and not us serve the government.
Brian, would you please read the email that you sent to me?
Okay. Linda, I was listening to your reporting, Bill Tompkins, and his knowledge about the alien races and the agendas they are attempting to carry out. I started to realize the things that my father had told me in his ending years of life that now made total sense to me. His account of the times during World War II flying bombing missions over Germany. The balls of light, which he called Foo Fighters, his 2 missions that he thought he and his crew were not going to make it back from Germany because his plane had been shot up so badly, flying only on 2 engines. And when he thought that everything was lost, he told me that he turned to his co-pilot, and there sitting between them was the image of Christ. He told me that Christ put his hand over his hand on the throttle of his B-17 and pushed him up to full power. This next thing my dad then said is what he was engulfed in a white light so bright he could not see anything in the cockpit of his bomber. And then, the next instant, his plane was over the English Channel, and he had lost several hours of time. As my dad was telling me about this mission, he was upset and crying. I had never seen my dad ever cry before in my life. Until the day my dad died, he would not say any more about that mission. He would tell me about his other missions flying over Germany as many times as I wanted to hear them. That one, only once did he talk about. That mission, I believe, was one of the Foo Fighter encounters he had, and his crew may have been abducted and then returned to the aircraft just before the plane reached England. Our family lineage is Nordic and Norwegian and goes back to the Viking clans. My dad's side of the family are all blue-eyed blondes, and my mom's side is German descent. What your guest, Bill Tompkins, was telling me about Nordic reptilian connection and some of the Nordic-type alien species has me wondering if my family is involved with that somehow. My dad also talked about his dreams of what he called reptile men during his time flying missions over Germany. He would laugh that off and say that he probably read too many comic books as a kid, but I think it scared him, and he had encounters also with the reptilians during one or more of his flights over Germany. I think all this means something, and hearing Bill Tompkins has triggered a better understanding of things that have happened.
Bill Tompkins, who Brian is referencing, is now a 93-year-old retired aerospace engineer and author of a recent book entitled selected by extraterrestrials, my life in the top secret world of UFOs, think tanks, and Nordic secretaries. Mr. Tompkins' extraordinary life included flying all over the United States in the 1940s to secret sites at Lockheed, Northrop, Douglas, and other aerospace companies, and top universities that were doing secret work for the United States Navy. In May 2016, I did an interview with him for my news website, earthfiles.com. Bill Tompkins told me as a young man in early 1942, he was inducted into the U.S. Navy, where he was asked to make scale models from photographs of extraterrestrial aerial craft the various corporate Navy contractors had learned about through government intelligence operatives that included Nazi SS manufacturing of anti-gravity spacecraft. Tompkins also learned that behind Adolf Hitler in the Second World War, there were two different species of reptilian humanoids. One included what he called Dracos from the Draco constellation, about 12 light years from Earth, and known as a satellite of our own Milky Way galaxy. According to Bill Tompkins, Navy intelligence learned that humanoid reptilians from the Draco constellation were manipulating Hitler to annihilate the Hebrews on Earth and populate the whole planet with blonde, blue-eyed Nordics that were another type of extraterrestrial under the control of the Draco reptilians. Bill Tompkins and his naval superiors were very confused by the idea that hostile reptiles and beautiful blonde humanoids were working together to take over planet Earth. Adding to their confusion were other beautiful Nordic humanoids that helped the Allies to defeat Hitler. That complex and insidious chess game haunted everyone then and still does today. Nordic blood and blonde-haired U.S. Navy flight engineer Brian and his father, who saw Christ in the crashing jet in World War II. They are definitely good guys. But Whitley, who, what, and why are there blonde and reptilian humanoids that want to destroy Hebrew bloodlines and perhaps all of Homo sapiens sapiens?
Just happened?
Well, it sounds like a computer or something just popped up.
Yeah, what happened was this. My phone is on silent. And suddenly Siri turned on and asked me if I wanted to call Ann's hospital.
Oh, my God!
It's sitting here totally untouched.
God, do you think Ann is there?
Well, all through the interview, I've been feeling Ann's presence really strongly and getting a lot of information from her about very deep soul work that doesn't seem superficially to have to do with the interview, but it's certainly going to be in my Awakening series that I've been doing on Unknown Country. But let's now look again. We were just talking about these blonde beings, and I was talking about the ones I had interacted with, who were obviously not the bad guys. I've mentioned before on this show that the one I had the telephone conversation with was very wary of the Greys, saying that if we started a war with them, they would never let us quit fighting and they would never let us win, which struck me as very like them in terms of personality as I understand it. I wouldn't be surprised if that would be exactly what they would do. But there was another time when these two enormous blonde people showed up in my apartment in Manhattan, which had rather low ceilings, much to their discomfort. And I blurted out when they asked me what they could do for me, I said, "You could show me one of your children," which I've always regretted. And yet they did a few weeks later in an airport in Colorado, in Stapleton, the old Stapleton Airport in Denver. And I've spoken about this many times, so all I will say is that under the circumstances, they showed me one of their children, and with the child was the scientist from Boulder, from the foothills above Boulder, and a heavily disguised gray, about 5 feet tall, who appeared to be taking care of the gigantic 6-year-old. It was a very, very strange sight, and in fact, they gathered a crowd when the gray and the giant little boy started playing patty cake so fast you couldn't see their hands.
Well, but there is this other facet that Bill Tompkins and others bring to all this.
Yes.
Bill Tompkins was this naval flight engineer who worked for our government in the Navy as a young man because he had this idiot savant ability to make absolutely accurate scale models from photographs and seeing real things. And so our government put him to work in a Navy program to look at photographs of different craft and make these scale models. And in the process, he learns about Dracos and Blondes, and one of the most, I think, eerie and has haunted me statements that he made was his learning that our government understood that the reptilians could create Nordic-looking, beautiful containers in order to inhabit as they infiltrated our population on our Earth and other planets, that the Draco reptilians want territory, they want to control territory, and they will do it in any way that involves camouflage, holograms, projecting into cloned or hybridized bodies that they make. On the other side, he said they began to understand that there were also blonde Nordics that are human allies. They want us to survive, and that the very fact that something seemingly as overbearing, overwhelming, and scary as these tall humanoid reptiles could project themselves into something that would appear to humans as beautiful blondes, while there were true other blondes that are our allies, makes this the most insidious situation, and that it is depressing. It became depressing to Bill Tompkins and others. How do humans understand which side, the friendlies, the unfriendlies that we're dealing with, if all of them can camouflage each other in their enemy or their ally, and we humans haven't got a clue?
Linda, I almost don't know how to respond to this, because we have a situation here that it's really kind of untenable, in the sense that we know something very strange is happening. People like Brian coming forward, I mean, let's face it, he saw something, wouldn't be out doing this.
Yeah.
But what really happened? Is it like this out there, or is something else true? And is it even from out there? I mean, we just don't even know that.
Well, Bill Tompkins also adds this huge, I think, insight that in World War II, Adolf Hitler had this obsession about Argentina and Antarctica.
Yes.
Well, and that Bill Tompkins says on the record, my gosh, he's working with Bob Wood, who worked for McDonnell Douglas, and Bob Wood has been helping Bill Tompkins edit his memoirs into autobiographies. And you can trust Bob Wood, and he's working with Bill Tompkins, and Bill Tompkins said that our government learned that there were 3 very large, to use the word cavern doesn't do it justice. He said they are natural large spaces in the Antarctica land base. I'm not talking about in the ice. I'm talking about under the land of Antarctica, and that non-humans have been using and inhabiting these large caverns in the Antarctic continent for millions of years. They are the alien presence that, when you go back to JFK and all of the whistleblowers that have come forward, like Caddy, who was the attorney who got the Watergate burglars out, and he did a long interview with Daniel List, a dark journalist, and he and I worked together and shared that Gaddy was saying that E. Howard Hunt, before he died, had told Gaddy that the reason JFK was assassinated by the CIA was because he had become a national security threat, because he was insisting on all the information about the, quote, alien presence, close quote, on Earth. That means it is here, it is underground, but it is also out there in the solar system and in the Milky Way and beyond.
And you have to think that if there's this problem of releasing information, then whoever is hiding is going to be extremely upset if it's released. In other words, somebody does not want that to happen. And that would be because whatever they're doing, they want to be left alone by the human population. They want us to not respond to their presence.
But it's so clear from Bill Tompkins and even John Brandenburg now, who is presenting scientific papers about the 2 atomic explosions on Mars.
Yes, we've had him on Dreamland. He's fabulous.
And that there has been secret, from Earth's point of view, secret. There have been all kinds of wars raging through this solar system, throughout the Milky Way galaxy, and as Bill Tompkins said, not only are there warring factions in the Milky Way galaxy, it goes way beyond into other galaxies, and that on this planet right now, as we are living and speaking, our government has secret galactic trade routes having to do with technologies and who knows what else that are going on with quote-unquote friendlies that are depositing things here on the Earth, getting technology from human engineers that they like, and that we are going forward into the 21st century as a planet that has been kept ignorant and dark, while there are percentages of the human population that are collaborating with, trading with, other intelligences in this galaxy and beyond. And that is what Bill Tompkins, Corey Good, Anthony Sanchez, a list is growing now, that their whistleblowers have insisted this is the truth. This is the reality, and this is also what Tom DeLonge, who is now allegedly working with 10 government insiders and put out that book, Secret Machines, to be followed by more, about the extraterrestrial presence on Earth, past, present, and future, and that what he is now trying to do is to work with government insiders with their approval and permission to say the Greeks were never gods, the Anunnaki were never gods, Lemuria Mu. These were all extraterrestrial civilizations inhabiting Earth for periods of time. The question that is not clear, why did they leave? Where are they now? And who will come back?
Well, you know, I have a message here from Anne, as Anne is very present in this conversation, and surprisingly to me, because this wasn't the sort of thing that she really focused on when we were still both in the physical, but here it is. She's saying, when people fail to keep their place, she means planet, then others will take it. Mm-hmm. It happens all the time. Mm-hmm. And you know what we're looking at here is a species, the human species, that is in the process of losing control of its planet, in its environment, and we are going to be in big trouble as a result of this. This has been the consistent message, not only in my experience with the visitors, primarily with the Greys, but with most every close encounter witness I know who's into this in some coherent way and not in the demons, angels space or something like that. That is that the planet's in trouble and we need to act on our own behalf. Interestingly enough, the Greys don't have the attitude that it's our fault. They feel it's the fault of our structure. In other words, we have no, and I learned this when I was a child in the secret school, we have no sexual seasonality. We have no hair, and we have very prominent genitals and excellent memories, and this has made us sexually overactive. And the result has been a population explosion that is not our fault. It's the fault of our evolutionary structure, but we're still in jeopardy because of it. Because if we lose the planet, then it's up for grabs. Somebody else can take it and do what they can to fix it and make use of it.
And that fits into what John Brandenburg says, that this is a neutral zone, or has been a neutral zone in terms of geopolitical territorial conflicts, that there are various types of non-human intelligences that come and go, and Earth is both a laboratory and a trade route market, and that there are interests out there that have been trying to undermine humanity so that we would become so weak that they can take the planet Earth, and that whatever happened on Mars, whatever was the reason behind that war, that whoever exploded these hydrogen bombs in the air to make the percussion on the ground even more destructive to what John Brandenburg thinks were two Cydonia area cities that may have had 2 million beings in them, all of it devastated with the two hydrogen bomb explosions. We need to find out who was responsible for the hydrogen bombs. I think John thinks it is the nasty category of Greys who were chasing after tall pails that have been described by others in books now, that there has been a war going on between tall pails and a certain faction of Greys for millennia, and that in Mars there was this war that had an ancient motive, but now it has affected our entire solar system without Earth humans understanding. And he said the most interesting thing to me recently, Whitley, John said the reason for the push, this clear push from NASA and JPL to get back to Mars, we need to have verification. We need to have a reality check as Homo sapiens sapien on what we have been told by Ebens, Greys, Nordics, or whoever, and that what essentially John thinks will happen, it will be a return to Mars. It will be disguised as exploring, getting out into our solar system, when in fact it will be an archaeological expedition to a dead planet that was killed by two hydrogen bomb explosions in the air.
Two truly massive explosions, if John is right. We had on the show on June the 15th, let's see, I guess it must have been Nick Redfern was with us with his book, Weapons of the Gods, and he was talking about areas in the Middle East that are glazed with trinitite.
Just like on Mars.
Exactly. Now, I want to now go from there to a letter I received many years ago from a lady who lived in Tennessee and had been out walking with her son in the woods when suddenly this little dark blue figure, and these kobolds, as I call them, are heavily involved with me right now. I'm having a period of time where I don't think I've ever been more involved with them than I am in these past 6 months. In any case, that aside, it came and he said, I'm a rebel and I'm here to tell you the truth. There was a war between Earth and Mars many, many, many years ago. Earth destroyed the surface of Mars, but we captured your souls and have condemned you to recycle on your planet forever. We call it dead forever. And that was it. It stepped back into the cave it had come out of and was gone. Now, flash forward to another event that took place in Indonesia. And folks, you can find this also because I interviewed the gentleman who was involved in this on Dreamland as well. And I'm working toward his name. Hopefully I'll remember it. And if I'll go back and edit it in here if I can't remember it right away. In any case, he was going to a village in Indonesia and had been told he was an NGO, a non-governmental organization operative, setting up low-power, localized radio stations so very isolated tribes could communicate among themselves. And he was going to this very isolated area. And in the context of this experience, he found out about a number of people who, Alan Lammers was his name, Lamers. Go to unknowncountry.com, go to Dreamland, go to the search engine, the extended search engine, click on Dreamland and put in Lamers and you'll find the interview if you're a subscriber. In any case, a group of 5 people had disappeared and only one of them came back. Ever. The other 4 were never been found. And he described walking through an area that ceased to be the jungle and became a kind of forested upland with antlered animals in it, which, of course, they don't have in Indonesia. And they were followed, he said, by this dark blue figure who said that he was a rebel. And this one man, was being sent back as a warning to the world. Now, I put all of that out without really putting it together, but it's linked. It's linked. There is somebody here trying in a kind of off-kilter way to somehow warn us about something. And there seem to be other forces less visible to us, more indirectly present, that are about the dangers that we are being warned of. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that makes any sense to anybody. I hope it does.
It does, because I have reported before about the Army sergeant in Colorado that I call CJ, who on July 29th, leaving Hunter Army Airfield to go to Fort Carson in Colorado, and he, his wife, 2 kids, and animals and all were headed to go through Atlanta, and something took over, diverted. The GPS did not make any alarm, and they end up having an 850-foot diameter disc with symbols on it come down in front of their truck. And he works in the Army in a role where his job is to see anything on the ground, in the air, and be able to analyze, estimate sizes, distances, and what they are. That's what he does for a living. And he knew that he was looking at something that was approximately 820 to 25 feet in diameter in front of the road. And then how it all unfolds, I have all of this at earthfiles.com, one of the most extraordinary missing time and evolving stories involving a military person that I've ever investigated. And when he comes, finally, when the whole family realizes they're on the wrong road, they're going the wrong direction, they had no clue from the GPS, he is completely astonished and confused. They get back in the road that will take them to Atlanta. They finally get to a motel and check in. Exhausted. But he finds himself opening his eyes, standing, leaning against the door jamb of the bathroom in the motel. In his one hand, he has a ballpoint pen. And the other hand, he has an 8.5 by 11 receipt from the motel when they checked in. And he is looking at the back of his receipt, and there is a string of squares and ones. And I have been working with Horace Drew, the geneticist in Sydney, in translating what appears to be binary code, even in layers. It's very complex. All of it. Everything that has been transpiring and continuing to come periodically into his mind in sleep ever since a year ago has to do with these same words that appeared in Peniston, that has appeared in crop formations, and has appeared in other binary-related translations. Humanity must advance in order to survive. Life is not guaranteed here, that we have allies, but there are enemies out there that want us gone. This is what this Army sergeant has been receiving for a year.
Well, you know, I often think either we're an incident in some vast, I don't even know if you can call it a conflict, in some vast disturbance that is sweeping around us, or we are the focus of a battle, literally, between dark and light, and or both.
Right.
And I have to say that I think it's very holographic. I think that what is happening to us reflects a fundamental condition of the universe. That is to say, this conflict that we see as a conflict is also the endless friction between dark and light. You know, Ann and I and Shirley MacLaine used to go to a restaurant up on the Pacific Coast Highway called Jeffrey's. It's a lovely place, and you can sit outside and have a lovely dinner overlooking the Pacific. It's just beautiful. And the sun sets and it gets dark, and we would sit out there and talk together for hours. And Shirley felt strongly that there was a great darkness that hated the light and had been at peace within itself before the light that is our universe appeared and wanted it gone. And Annie was always the one on the side of the light, and listening to them, not that Shirley wasn't either, but they were talking about it. In other words, Annie talked about what the light wanted and Shirley what the dark wanted. I'm not saying that Shirley was on the dark side and Anne was on the light side at all. But their discussions were so large scale that when I go back in my mind to them and I listen to us talking, it is really like we are talking about the same thing, but on a much smaller scale.
Right.
And I think that we're not necessarily talking about a war so much as a fundamental condition of reality.
And Whitley, according to Bohm and other physicists, it was Bohm who was so eloquent, said all mass is frozen light. And now we have a Harvard physicist who is saying that there are positive photons, and those photons in Bell's theorem have been proved to be entangled, connected, linked over a 13.9 billion light-year universe. And yet dark matter and dark energy is the biggest mystery. And now at Harvard University, physicist Randall is talking about and writing about dark photons. And I could not help but in recently reading about her research that if there are dark photons and there are light photons, what is the relationship? And could we be in a universe in which the very fabric of our puzzlement over dark matter and energy versus the entanglement of bright, white, pure photons be the essence of a struggle here that is macro and micro?
Linda Moulton Howe, thank you so much for being with us on